Welcome to Shift Happens, From Pain to Purpose, the podcast where we explore the power of sharing your story. Each week, you'll learn from entrepreneurs and everyday heroes to uncover how their stories of struggle become stories of strength. I'm your host, Alexis Andra, creative director, life coach, and lover of a great comeback story. Together, we're going to explore the healing power of storytelling and inspire you to find your voice, own your journey, and shift your pain into purpose. Let's dive in because your story just might change someone else's.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Alexis's story part 2 of Shift Happens. We dove right in last week and we talked about so much of your childhood and upbringing. And man, if you guys missed it, go take a listen because I'm still processing everything that you've walked through and overcame. I remember leaving that podcast and going and debriefing with my friend. And I was like, can you believe that this happened to you?
That's so funny.
Specifically, you being left alone in a hospital for 2 months.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm still processing.
You
still
know what?
at 36.
I think there's like a meme. I'm 34.
34, my bad.
Calm
Didn't mean
down.
to age you.
Wow.
Sorry.
I think that there's like this meme that's like, there's a few memes, but one's like, you're just reliving your life, or you're telling your friends your life, and you didn't realize like how it's not normal until it's like there's like an awkward silence at the table. That's like how that feels. Like telling my story. We're like, okay, wow, there's a lot.
Yeah, you're like, I know, and you turn your pain into humor, and people don't get that. Sometimes I make like self-deprecating jokes, and people are like, oh, I'm like, but we can laugh about it, guys. It's funny.
Totally do that, especially with like getting burned. I'll say so many jokes about like, oh, I don't want to get burned again, or like extra crispy or something like that. I'll totally joke.
Oh, extra crispy. That's a good one.
No, it is good.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You say that the biggest compliment you get is when people tell you you're funny, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So see, let's just all go through trauma for humor.
Funny, but also that I'm a light, like that they could see a light in me. That would be like my number one.
Way to turn that around. Okay, so we left off last week talking about how in high school you navigated drugs and really just giving away parts of yourself to people because you just felt numb and it was just a way of coping, and how you really came to know the Lord after high school when a friend invited you, and you really gave your life to him and had a salvation moment with him. So knowing your past and knowing that come to Jesus moment, I think sometimes when we come to Jesus, we think that life is automatically going to get so much better and, we're free of our past. But then we start to really dive into the mistakes that we've made or just some of the things that have happened to us. Can you describe to us your journey after giving your life to Jesus, and just walking through like being able to receive like God's grace and love, even though you made mistakes in your past and the things that you were doing?
Yeah, I think it was such a foreign concept to me that it was so new when I would attend church and hear the worship songs and be around other people that it took me a while to like kind of get it.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like the way you dress, or I used to cuss so much. Like I had the worst mouth. Like every other word was like F this, and I thought I was so cool. And this is nothing against anyone who cusses, because I have a lot of Christian friends too that cuss. Yeah. And this is just my personal conviction where I had to really learn how to I don't want to say like be like a certain way or try to be like fit, but I did feel a little pressure to like fit in with like these new Christian friends. And the first thing that I realized was my mouth. My mouth and my clothes.
Okay.
So yeah. So I was like, okay, that took a little bit of time to get used to. But what I always thought, and I still think this way about using your words, is if there was somebody that I came into contact with and they had no idea I was a Christian and I didn't talk about my religion, how could they tell right away that something was different about me? And it's the way I talk. Yeah. And that's true. And so that's why I don't cuss. Because
I was going to say, I don't think I've heard you say a cuss word.
You've never heard me cuss.
Yeah. That's why when you're like, I used to do it, I'm like, really? I can't imagine it.
Yeah, like I legitimately don't cuss.
Yeah.
Like sometimes in my head it will flicker in there.
Yeah. You're like,
I'm like, I feel like, but it's honestly just me wanting to be a person of influence and have something be different about me, and maybe someone will ask me about it. I think it's really noticeable when you don't.
Yeah, I think sometimes as, Christians, we focus on these like big changes that we have to make, but we forget that it's the little things that have the most impact on people that don't believe in Jesus.
Exactly.
And so, what you said, like people notice like, hey, you don't cuss, like why? And it just opens the door for like those conversations.
And I didn't drink for like, I want to say like 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Like never even a sip, really. Like, so I completely like didn't drink. I would go to events for work with the Shift Creative. And that was another thing. I was like, I'm not drinking. I'm not, like people would offer it. And then it would be like kind of like a segue into my relationship with God. And so those things I think were new for me as a Christian. But when we talk about coming from one way of living into the Christian way of living, I think some people can definitely deal with shame. I think I dealt with those feelings maybe more when a few things happened. One, and I don't remember if I talked about this in the last episode, but when my best friend passed away.
You didn't.
Okay. So I was still a new Christian. My best friend passed away. And we had these plans, like we were going to go sell everything and go to Vietnam and Thailand, and we were going to travel. I was actually in like contact with this missionary in Thailand, and we were going to go like meet up with her, and it was this whole thing. So I had gotten back from Australia, backpacked through Australia by myself, and then also went to Vietnam by myself to do volunteer work. Came back. The plan was me and my best friend. Now we're going to do that together, but more God focused. And, there was a pivotal moment where she came over to my house and she told me that she couldn't.
Oh.
And we weren't on the same page.
Okay.
She was like, I don't think I can go all in like you are.
Okay.
Because sometimes when you're a new Christian, to faith. Sometimes when you're new Christian, you have so much zeal. Yeah. It can be annoying. Yeah. But it can also
you're like, okay.
It's like, oh, okay, you love Jesus. That's kind of how I was.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you were on fire.
I was on fire for God. But for those who are listening that don't have a relationship with Jesus, it can seem very intense.
Yeah.
And so, I'm here ready to sell everything. Like I'm, let's be a missionary.
Buy old life. Hello, new.
Yes, and I'm bringing my best friend with me.
Yeah.
She would go to church and she would with me. And there was that moment where I just looked at her. And again, I'm a new Christian, so my verbiage is different than it would be today. But I said, if you can look at me and tell me you're happy, I'll stop the conversation. I'll end it. And she couldn't, and she started crying, and I started crying, and we're just like hugging. And she just said that she doesn't know why she can't, like she's not happy, but she doesn't know why she can't fully go in. And then fast forward a few months, literally just a few months, there was this open mic at the community college I was going to, and I had invited her. She kind of mocked it a little bit, and then as I was reversing from this event at the community college, I get a knock on my window. It's her. Okay. Tripped out. I was like, hey, what are you doing here? She was like, oh, I actually had class. I was like, what? Weird. I didn't know. Yeah. So she got in. We're driving around, talking a little bit. She's talking about her life. I'm talking about mine. Very clear we're on separate paths. And so literally that day, the following week, I get a phone call from our other really, really good friend. And she told me my best friend got into a car accident. And I was like, okay, where? Like, what hospital? And she was just like, no, like she got in a car accident. And I said, well, what hospital? And she goes, she passed away. Oh, wow. She died. And I mean, it was a shock. I go to her parents' house and, it was just crazy. It was a crazy experience. But in that time, it's interesting because the shame, I'm still a very new Christian. The shame more was, I felt like I was betraying my friends, my friends that I would like party with and hang out with, because I wasn't going out with them partying to celebrate her life. I was hanging out with my Christian friends, and we went to the crash site and prayed over it. They like cleaned my whole house. My Christian friends that again, these are new people in my life, cleaned my whole house for me. Like when she passed away, because I held the reception at my house for her, and were really there for me, but it looked different. And so it was interesting. Like the shame I felt was less about like Jesus not accepting me, but maybe more like, oh, am I like abandoning my friends?
Yeah. I mean,
does that make sense?
Definitely. Because I think, you're leaving your old life. You're not necessarily leaving people. And I actually love that you bring this up, because I think so many times like people that have friends in their life that come to know Jesus, they think that they've, changed so much, and they all of a sudden look down on them and bring shame to them.
Yes, they feel judged.
Yeah. So how would you encourage, those believers that are maybe coming to know Jesus and they feel that tension that you felt with your friend group?
It's definitely hard because you're trying to navigate your faith walk and you're trying to do things like, quote unquote, the right way, or maybe for a better word, a godly way. And so you have to know, I think it's not a blanket statement. I think it's dependent on the person. Because if you have an addictive personality, you can't go and hang out with those same friends and put yourself in those situations and be like, I'm going to be the light, and everyone's doing drugs, but you have an addictive personality or you struggle with addiction. That's not going to be wise. But if you're someone who doesn't battle with that, I think that it's so important to show up for your friends in a different way.
Yeah.
You can be intentional with lunches, dinners, showing up for things that are important, like graduations or birthday parties, or they just had a baby. There's other ways that you can show love and be there. It will look different. I have not heard of any relationship that it's going to be, if you're changing, that relationship is going to look different.
Yeah.
And you could even compare that to seasons of life, even with any friendship or in marriage. Even as you're changing and you're growing, the relationship might look different. And I think that that's okay. And I also think that there's seasons of friendships, and sometimes they might come back in at a different point, at a different part of your life, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
So it's not a one size fit all, but I would just say try to be intentional in the ways that you can show up.
No, it's true. I always say, like, when I became a believer, I had a lot of friends from high school, and I liked to go to parties too and, get drunk, all the things. And I remember being offended at first of like why I wasn't being invited to things.
Me too.
I was like upset. I'm like, why? Like, I'm still fun. I'm still great. I still have my same personality. And then I just had this realization where God was like, you're not the friend they call anymore to have a good time, but you're the friend that they call in times of need.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the kind of people you want to be,
Yeah. I really struggled. I will say I really, really struggled with actually not fitting in either group. I struggled.
Okay.
Yes. I struggled fitting in with my friends that weren't Christian because I wasn't partying anymore. And people would say I miss the old Alexis. Like, I was a very big partier. Like, anyone that knows me knows.
You're still the life of the party, but just in a different way.
It's just in a different way. Yeah. But I would be down to like go to Vegas and maybe take some ecstasy and like hang out for like someone could call me and be like, let's go. I'd be like, let's go,
You had no fear.
I had no fear. Like, let's go. I'm down, But so when I became a Christian, I didn't fit in there. They weren't inviting me anymore because I wasn't as fun. And then with the Christians, I wasn't Christian enough. And also I was new. I was newer, And so and to be quite honest, I kind of still feel a little bit of that tension.
Well, okay.
Because
I would encourage you with this, though, is we all have different gifts and different purposes, right? Well, we're all made with the purpose to know Jesus and be more like him, but we have different gifts. And for you do have an ability and gift to be able to reach the unbelievers and be able to talk to them.
Yeah.
And that is why you probably don't feel super comfortable, because you're not necessarily, like, your ministry isn't within a church.
No.
Your ministry
I'm not trying to reach other Christians.
Exactly. Your ministry is in the workplace.
Necessarily.
Yeah, and the unbelievers. And so that's why, because that's not where your full purpose and gifts are. Does that make sense?
No, and I totally agree with that. I think it is an interesting line.
Yes.
Because, and I have very well-meaning, great Christian friends that would be like, Alexis, delete that post. I'm like, why?
Like, what kind of post?
I don't really want to talk about it. Well, because I ended up deleting it after a minute. I think I did talk to you about it. It was like the porn one.
Okay.
Yeah. But which I have no problem talking about porn. And I think that more Christians should talk about porn and sex.
Specifically with women.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with men.
Yeah, but I think.
But yes,
you know what I mean. Yeah.
I do know what you mean.
Yeah.
Shoot. I'm over here single after being married, struggling, So I don't think we talk about it enough, but I definitely do still feel like the tension, like the tension between not fitting into both and kind of just like being okay with that.
So how would you encourage someone that's maybe feeling the same things you are?
You just got to be true to who you are.
Yeah.
and know, just like what you said, that your purpose is looking different. And obviously, like, you want everything that we should be doing should be aligned with God's word. So if you're stepping outside of God's word, okay, then that's something different. That's not what we're talking about here. It's just more about using your story to reach people, and it will look different. The way that you communicate can look different. The platform will look different. And maybe the humor looks different, and that's okay. Because that's how God has equipped you.
Yeah. That's good. So we just talked about your best friend. What was her name?
Kristen.
So Kristen passed away and you were in college at the time?
Yes, I was 19.
Okay. So take me back into what you were pursuing in college. Like, what were you trying to study? Yeah. What was your purpose then?
Yeah, so I went to CBU and I went for counseling. So my goal was to be a counselor. So before that,
podcaster.
It does. It really does make sense. So before that, I got accepted to FITM, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, for those who don't know. And I was going to pursue their fashion or interior design. Okay. I got accepted to that to go to FITM. But something in me was like, no, counseling. Honestly, it felt like counseling was a safer bet. I was like, man, like it might be hard to build that. And I don't know. Counseling seems like, let me go to school. I was kind of like,
it was more of a set path.
Yeah, I was like, you have to go to school and you'll get the degree, and then I can
practice it and have a practice.
Yes, it was a clearer vision, I think.
Yes.
So I went to school for counseling, and then I got married when I was 22, and then I got pregnant 3 months later, and I was still at CBU. I was a senior at CBU. Graduated when Sophia was in my stomach. I think I was like, I was 7 months pregnant. Yeah. Okay. Wow. I was 7 months pregnant, graduated, walked down the aisle. I had to make sure. I was like, I'm married. You know, I'm going to a Christian college and I'm pregnant, walking down the.
I'm married. That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh, don't judge me. And so then, and then she was born. Shortly after that, we opened up a coffee shop. 2 weeks later, actually. We opened up a coffee shop in Riverside. 6 months later, from that, I had started developing what is now the Shift Creative.
Okay.
But yeah, so, but the background was counseling.
But you did mention that you were first interested in FITM. Have you always known you were a creative and have like the gift of like vision and creativity?
Yeah, I always was interested in all things. Like, I got like voted one year like going to be a fashion designer. I was always into clothes and style and into redecorating my room. And, you know, my friends would ask me to give advice on their house. And
so you always had the influence of like creativity. Okay. And people saw that.
But then I also got an award for being wise among my years. And so everyone would always tell me that I'm more wise, just like they tell you. And so that was also, so it's like both. It's like the counseling and the creative side. And so that's why a big reason of the podcast, right, where it's merging both. And also a reason why I launched the one-on-one coaching, because it kind of merges like the counseling, the personal relational end with also business, strategy, creativity.
Yeah. And so what was the vision behind the Shift Creative? Like, what made you want to start that? And how did you get into it?
Honestly, it was just an idea and I just went for it. But it was, I mean, people encouraged me just to start a blog. And then because I had Sophia, I didn't want to go back to school for more, like to get a different, another degree. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to start this blog. I came up with the name of The Shift Creative because I was like, what's my goal? Okay, I want to shift the creative process. I want to shift the way people think about creativity, art. Because a lot of times when people think of an artist, they think mainly like murals or like fine line, like, you know, different than building like art installations, you know? So I was like, I want to like revamp the way people think about art. And so that's how the Shift Creative came into play.
Wow. And you've been doing it for
over 10 years.
10 years. And you
over 10 years now, yeah.
First started it by yourself, but then you're
for a while. But interns came quick. Okay. Because people would just reach out to me and ask to intern. And that's how the whole internship program happened, because like I didn't even look for it. Yeah. People would literally be like, I would love to help you for free. I would just love to help you and learn and be around these events and stuff. And so that's from the desire is why I created the internship program.
And then when did your husband come to work with
you?
He
came 3 years, like not into it. He came, okay, so if I'm in, I have to do the math because
I know, right?
Probably like year 5.
Okay. And what was that journey like?
Honestly, it wasn't bad at all.
Okay.
Like I always say like 80-20. Like
Okay.
80% great, 20% you're annoying me, you know? But we had our roles. Like he was more in the structure of the building of the sets. And then I was more the design, admin, the business end of things.
Yeah.
So there was times where definitely our communication would like not be good, or like I'd be like, no, this is how I want it, you know? But honestly, looking back, how do I say this? Maybe I took it for granted a little bit because he put in a lot of work.
Yeah, he's very talented.
He's so talented, but he also, like, you know, we would stay very late, midnight, 2 a.m. at the warehouse with our kids sometimes, or have to have babysitters, or like bring our kids to installs. Like we were like hustling still, and so like it was really beneficial to have him. Have him there and have his skill set there. And I think the hard part after we divorced was finding people who were reliable and talented to still put in that same
because it was your husband, so there's not a layer of like shame when it comes to like asking. You know, it's like, you're my husband, like
we gotta do this. There's
he's like, you're my wife, this is your business, do it. You know, there's no shame there. And obviously, when you have employees, there are boundaries that you have to have.
Can't believe you have to sleep here.
You know. But we'll get into the divorce later. But I do want to talk to, because there are people on here that do look up to you as like a visionary and as a business owner. And so I think a lot of times people say that creatives make the worst bosses. You've heard that time and time again.
I should interview you.
So
you're like,
I'm just saying because like I get it for myself too.
No,
like,
I get
as
it.
a creative, like we're kind of all over the place.
I totally get it. I don't really want to be the boss.
Yeah, it's not great. So how would you encourage someone that has maybe like the gift of creativity that is kind of scared to take the step into doing something for themselves? Because I think creatives, we operate one of 2 ways. We either think like everything we do is so extraordinary, never been done, or it's the complete opposite of like, I'm a complete failure, I don't know why I'm doing this.
And I think sometimes it's both. Like sometimes when you're creating something, you think you have this great idea, and as you're doing it, you're like, this idea sucks, right? And then you turn it around, and you're like, I am awesome, you know. But to answer I think the first question though is like creatives with like being like a boss or like a leader, and I think that the rub there is what I would say is many creatives don't set out to be bosses. They set out because they're trying to stand out just as themselves in their
individuals,
art, in their art, their work. So they're not necessarily thinking about
long-term vision,
leadership, how to be a boss, how to run a team. They're thinking about, how can I make the next big idea? That's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking, okay, well, if I do this next big idea, what system can I put into place to make it run well? And I'm not saying that every creative is like that. I am just saying, for the most part, we love to live in the creativity. So I think that that's the tension. I would say if I could go back, something I would do, I mean, I don't know if it's like different because we are where we are now. But I think a piece of advice would be, okay, like lead with your creativity, and then once things start picking up and you're able to hire someone, then hire someone that's like the project manager or the logistics, someone that can jump in sooner rather than later to help you formulate those systems and take care of the things that you're not good at.
Like take the risk earlier of like letting go of like control of something. Or even like when it comes to money, it's like invest in an employee that can help build up your company. Exactly. Also, I think with in the creative realm, what's hard, and you've seen this with Shift, and I still think it's a tension with Shift, is when you're building it and you are the visionary, it's hard to have other people's ideas, and I'm like, maybe not as good of an idea as I don't think it is. Or 2, it all kind of falls on you for the vision. And then you're like, well, how do you scale? How do you kind of step out of it as the boss or as like the, the founder, if
people are really looking to you for the ideas and their creativity. I think that's the rub too.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like developing the skill sets of people under you, or if it's like a graphic designer or whoever it is, the people doing, you know, the mock-ups, and like kind of like entrusting them, but also probably like teaching and coaching them more is something that is more beneficial.
Yeah, that's good. What has been your biggest failure in business, and how have you learned from it and overcame it?
Well, are we saying names on this?
I don't know. It's your podcast.
I know, but I probably won't. Okay, so I would say we got hired by this really big company that everyone knows.
We laugh because we're still a little
I laugh because like, actually like, it's so hard to talk about. That was every single person knows this company. Like honestly.
Every single person.
Yeah. And basically what I don't know how much to go into it, but basically what happened was one of the fabricators said that they could do something that they couldn't do. And we did not know that. And so we thought we did our due diligence, making sure that the fabricator was great. Like we looked at his work and we visited him before, like anything, you know, like we did the homework on the back end. And then we show up. I think it was the day before the event.
The day before.
And there was literally like barely
10%.
anything done. Yeah. There was barely anything done. And I just went into just the mode of like, okay, we're pitching in. Let's start sanding. Let's start painting. I flew up 3 of my old workers, flights, because we were in a different part of the state, hotels, food. I was like, I will do whatever to make this work. And what I can say, even though it's a quote unquote failure, is I could step away from that experience and know I freaking did everything I could to try to make it right.
Yeah, you didn't give up.
I did not give up at all. Neither did you guys. But like, I literally did not. I was like, what can I do?
Yeah. We had breakdowns of crying.
I didn't cry all on that trip yet.
Oh.
It was after.
Just me.
It was after, I think. Because I couldn't. Because I had to hold it together. Because I'm talking to the clients. And so I couldn't break down. So, but I'll bring it in. I'll bring it in a little bit more. So basically we show up, there's nothing done really. Okay. And so when I call up the other people to come help, we're all there. The one guy, he's like hiring people off the street. That was our client, or the fabricator was hiring people off the street that had no experience. We don't know what was going on with this guy. Yeah. It was not good. It was so not good. We ended up working for 3 days straight with no sleep. I'm going to say like 10-minute naps. Yeah. Barely. I don't think I ate. And it was just really, really rough. So basically, we pulled it off by the skin of our teeth. We pulled it off. But it just wasn't the quality of work that the Shift Creative is known for, because we are known for the quality of work.
Yes.
And
not just design.
Not just design, but it was the quality. And it was one of those things that I have never felt so humiliated in my whole career. And I felt like what was hard was I felt like the client was looking at me in particular as the owner, like, what the heck are you doing? Like, what, like almost like this is, I don't know. I just felt humiliated or like almost like maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, but like we were doing everything we could. I was paying out of my own pocket, not even the company's pocket, my own pocket, over $20K just to fly people up and for materials. We were going to Home Depot, Lowe's. We were doing everything we could. And I don't know if they understood that, but also it's not their job to care. Like they're hiring us for a job. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Yeah. They hired us for a job, and we need to deliver. And even though we did make it work, it wasn't the quality that I was supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, the worst part about that whole experience was not even the fact that, you know, we weren't sleeping, we were doing all these things. It was the walking around with things being said about us in front of us. Yeah. And what you said, like the humiliation.
It was
and
humiliating.
It's like, we look back on that, and of course, in the moment, we're like, I can't believe these people are saying these things. But of course, it's frustrating that.
Yeah, if I was there, I'd be like, what's going on with this team? You know?
After that, what quote unquote like failure, you have what I call is your pit season as a business owner, where you were just really struggling with feelings of like failure, feelings of
Mm.
inadequacy, feeling like you weren't enough to be able to do these
Mm.
things. I mean, you were feeling sick like every week, right?
It was a lot. Well, lawyers got involved.
Yeah, it was very stressful.
For me to the fabrication team. I let go of money. I told the client not to even pay me the rest. I was trying to like even rebuild sets, but then like I was so in the negative with the business, with how much money I lost, that I was like, I might have to like close the business. It was that serious.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was like gonna end the business. That's how bad it was.
Yeah. And so that's why I call it your pit season.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that season? And how did you?
I don't know. I think I'm still overcoming. I think we're getting out of it. I think the main thing was we started pivoting more into branding and brand campaigns, which I'm super excited about. It's not that we don't do fabrication work. It's just that we have our like expert fabricators that we work with now, which it's so different than what it was then. And so I think that was really helpful to like birth a new creative baby, if you will, and kind of give space to that. But I think also something that I do well, and I think even in this conversation I've talked about, is not necessarily like, yes, it's a failure, but it's like, what can you learn from it to be better, to be a better leader, excuse me, and a better creative in the future. And that is something that I'll never take for granted. Like there were so many things I learned from it. So I think that that's also been helpful.
Yeah. If you're looking to start a business, no, that's not easier then, because I think people think it's easier, but every failure falls on you.
No, I felt so grieved.
Yeah.
With you, with our project manager, with everyone that I hired, that I flew up, the clients, it all landed on my shoulders. It affected everybody, but it's different when it's your company and it's your money too. On it, truly. It's like at the end of the day, I still have to pay everybody and I'm not getting paid, And so it was one of those things where I thought I was going to have a mental breakdown.
And
like for real, like I got off the plane and I had to drive to my daughter's soccer game that day because I already had my ex-husband like watching the kids, I think 2 extra days. And it's really hard with co-parenting. Like you want to honor and respect. And I was like, I want to show up for my kids too. Like it's so important to them that I'm there.
Yeah.
I had to like go to the soccer game, literally off the plane from that trip. I went to the soccer game and just had to be like, you did so good on your soccer game.
Yeah.
So it's not just the business end. You have to look at, I have a life out of the business end too. As a single mom, it's definitely was a lot. Alexis here. Don't skip past me just yet. If you love what you're hearing from Shift Happens, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review so we can continue sharing stories of impact. Thank you. And now back to another powerful story.
Well, that leads into my next question, because not only were you going through the transition as losing your like co-partner in business, your husband, right? The person that you were able to lean in, you were also navigating divorce and life post-divorce and
I think that was like
things.
a year after, huh?
Yeah.
I think that was like a year.
It was a year after.
Oh no, maybe it was a year and a half.
Yeah.
Year and a half or 2 years.
Yeah. But I think you were in the season of learning co-parenting, learning life as a single mom, all the things. So can you walk us through the journey of your divorce and
like what part?
Just, I would say maybe walk us through the journey of your divorce and how that impacted your faith and being so planted and rooted in church.
So for anyone who has gone through a divorce, we all know it's not just like a decision you make one night and then you just say, oh, I'm going to get divorced. I think when you have kids, it makes it a lot more complicated. If you don't have kids, it's easier, I will say. But it definitely was a process to come to that decision. I think because I was so involved at my church, it really created a big ripple effect in my personal life. And so it looked like a feeling, like I didn't really, I felt like I didn't have any friends. Now, if I were going to talk to those people today, they'd be like, no, we'd be your friends. But I'm like, yeah.
Well, I think you can be honest. Like,
no, I know, but I'm just saying, I think that because I have talked to some people and I think they would say, well, we've never like left you, but but also you didn't show up in the way that maybe I needed. And maybe they didn't know how to show up for me too. I'll give them that grace. But I just think that I was very, very involved at a significant church, I'll say, and it definitely felt like I was not important. Like, you know, it definitely felt like I didn't get to say my, like, I never got to have like a sit down moment with some of my friends and be like, well, this is what happened, or this is XYZ. I felt like they kind of took my ex's side and didn't give me the chance to explain. That's just my take on it, or my perspective on it. I felt like I was kind of like, I felt like some of the people in the church looked at me as kind of like, well, you should be doing it this way or that way, when I was just like, obviously in a dark place. I wasn't like thinking, how can I be a great friend? I wasn't thinking, how can I deliver this information to everybody? I wasn't thinking, what's the best, like, none of that was crossing my mind. It was more just like, okay, how can I be there for my kids? What am I going to tell my kids? Okay, I have to move. What, like, 3 friends can help me move? You know, like it, like I had to have like our workers help me move, like through shift. I like paid them to help me move it, and then I had a few of my close friends were there that were there and did help me move as well. But it's not like people were like showing up asking how they could help me besides that select few. So I think that it really affected my faith. I think that not in a way of just feeling shame. So we talked about shame at the beginning of like, did I feel shame when I first came to know the Lord? I felt more shame during this season of life with the divorce. I felt like everyone knew my business. I felt like if I went to my kids' school, everyone knew everything about me, which is part of the, like, a part of being like public figure, kind of, if you will, like on Instagram, is like everyone thinks that they know you and they think that they
have a right to an opinion.
Yes. And then I felt like there was so much gossip circling around the divorce that I felt like people thought that they knew things that you don't know because you're not in my marriage. You know? And so that was really hard to navigate. So I think there's just been a period of me isolating from being as involved in church.
And I think when you brought up how people were gossiping, I think
I'm so sensitive to gossip.
Yes, me too. It's one of my biggest pet peeves in life. But talk me through, because you have 2 kids. You know, you have Sophia and Sully, and there were a lot of things said about you that weren't true. And I think sometimes people that are walking through divorce, they want to fight against every truth and be like,
that was
no,
hard.
This is the real thing, not what you're saying. How did you navigate that? Like knowing when to bite your tongue and knowing when to say something, because
that was so hard.
You're not just an ex-wife, like you're still a mother.
Yeah. I think that is when you have to have your faith and be like, God has your back. God holds your reputation. God holds your reputation. You don't have to have an answer for everything. You don't have to respond to everything. Almost just like let people think what they're going to think. And I just realized, like, what can I control? And what I can control is how I show up and how I interact with people. That's all I can control. So maybe they heard something about me. Maybe it's true. Or maybe there's a little bit of truth. Maybe there's no truth. That's how gossip works. Sometimes there's a little bit of truth and then you add to it and then you say, I heard this. So sometimes it originates from a little bit of truth, right? So I think that what's easy is to let that truth dictate the way that you perceive people. And so I just try to show up and be as kind, as nice, however God would want me to be to everybody, and then they can make their own judgment. I can't control what people are going to think about me. Right. And so, there was definitely times I would like go to my kids' school and just be like, I'm trying to get in and out. Like, am I trying to look at anybody? I still feel that way though. I'm like, I'm not trying to craft with you guys in the room. And everyone's like, why isn't she crafting? Probably she owns this business. I'm like, it's not for me. But it's like, you know, I do feel like some of that may be true, the judgment, and some of it I can create in my head because of shame. So,
you talked about friendships and how there are friends that maybe didn't react the way that they should have, and they didn't support you or do the things that you needed. Because I think, I don't know why we do this as humans, but sometimes when someone so close to us is going through something, we like take it on ourselves, and we don't make it about ourselves, but we're like, how do we respond
100%
in a way that is truthful and honest, but also loving, you know?
And I totally get that because, and I feel like I'm really fair
Mhm.
when I talk about my divorce. I really do. There's a lot of things that I don't feel like are necessary to say to everybody
Totally, yeah.
on this podcast, where I've sinned and where, you know, my ex would take ownership of his sin, right?
Yeah.
There's sin on both sides. We're humans. I think I try to do a very good job of putting myself in everyone's shoes that I felt hurt by and say they did what made sense to them. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but they did what made the most sense to them in the time. I think that we struggle with showing up because then we think that that person will think we're agreeing with them. And in the Christian, you know, bubble, if you will, not bubble, Christian,
world,
whatever. So sensitive people. So I think that it's easy to not want to condone divorce. So they will create distance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They don't want to be like, oh, well, I'm still going to hang out with you and go to dinner with you and take pictures with you because I don't want people to think that I'm like agreeing with you getting divorced or whatever I heard about your marriage. I don't want it to seem like I'm associated with you.
Yeah.
You know? And like, that's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
And that's like real life. So I think that a lot of people created distance because they didn't want people to think like, oh, that must be the stamp of approval. Like does that make sense what I'm saying?
Definitely. I mean, I've heard it once said, like, because I serve in the church in a big way, and sometimes, like, I don't necessarily agree with, like, how leadership is going about something. And I'm not talking about any, like, controversial topics. It could be something small of, like, let's do the game this way. And I'm like, I don't think the game should be run that way. But it's, at our church, we always say, like, you don't have to be in agreement, but you have to be in alignment. And I think what you're saying is a lot of people were afraid that if they were like to support you, it would be agreeing with the things, but it's like, it's not about that. It's about being in alignment with God's heart for his people. And every story in the Bible points to how God chooses and continuously chooses the broken and the people that don't have like the titles that we think are good, you know?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great point for anyone that is battling shame. If you've gone through a divorce, if you have a drug addiction, if you're addicted to porn, whatever the case may be, I think it's such a great reminder that God uses those people to reach so many. He does not use the people that appear to have it all together. He uses the people that come real and just willing to be used.
To surrender,
to the Lord. You know, I will say really quick about showing up and the difference between supporting someone's decision and just loving them. It's different.
Right, because there's enablement and that's a bad thing.
Yes, and I was never asking anyone to show up and just like sit and like braid my hair and be like, you're doing the right thing. I was totally fine with people saying, oh, I don't believe you should get divorced. Or, you know, is there something else that you could be doing or like, but again, I don't really feel like I was given the opportunity to even have that conversation. I don't know. I mean, I did file. So part of it is I filed for divorce and I didn't include other people in that decision. And that's part of why some people were upset. I get it. Like I had pursued counsel initially with separation. And then I just was like, I'm done after that. So I understand the feelings there. There was just no other follow-up after that. And so I think that if you are the friend that's witnessing someone else going through a hard time in their life, just know you can't expect them to show up for you. You have to show up for them if you still want that relationship. They're in no way, shape, or form able to give you what you want. They just can't. I couldn't. I could not be a good friend. I was incapable. I was so not blinded, but like dark in my own grief.
You were navigating,
you know, that I couldn't be like, you know, I should rethink everything. Like, I should bring everyone in and have an intervention here. I don't know. And I didn't want to. I didn't want it. I wanted to get divorced. Just,
Well, and
so I just
and the enemy, that's his main tactic, is for us to isolate in times, right? And so God doesn't bring us shame. Sometimes people do, but we know the enemy brings us shame. And so to that point, like, what's one piece of advice for maybe someone has been planted and rooted in church and they've experienced that quote unquote like church hurt? Because we could look back at your journey through the divorce and could say that you did experience church hurt by the people, right? And how would you encourage them to still stay planted in their faith and in God? Because that's something that I always have admired about your journey.
Brooklyn's like, leave the church, come to my church. No, my girl. No, I like, don't get too real on here. Listen, it's because I don't feel like God has called me out of the church. I've been hurt by some people in the church, but it's because we are people. We all make mistakes. I have made mistakes. Other people have made mistakes. It's affected me, and my mistakes and sin have affected others. So with that knowledge and that perspective, I can say I can stay put. I can grow in my faith.
Yeah.
I can glean from the messages. I can grow in community because God has not called me out.
Yeah.
It's different if it's like, well, I'm hurt and whatever, this. So I'm just going to up and leave because I have church hurt. Well, okay. Or like, is that you or is that God calling you out? I think that there needs to be things that line up with God clearly calling you out, opening up another opportunity somewhere else, or if there's maybe you don't feel safe, there's other things that I think God will reveal other than you just deciding, well, these few people in this whole big church have hurt me. I think what I will say is that if I wasn't as strong in my faith, I probably would have walked away.
Yeah, definitely, because
of my perceived hurt. So if I wasn't a true Christian, I probably would have abandoned my faith. Like, truly.
Yeah.
So I think that that's also a word for people in the church to just be careful how you handle some of these situations. Again, we're not saying condone it. We're not saying be in support of something you don't agree with, but there's maybe just be a little bit more mindful.
Well, there's like a time when we're discipling one another, because, we're all called to disciple one another. There's a time and place in which you love people and which you challenge people. Like, we should always call people higher. We should always challenge them with the truth of the gospel. But there are moments when people don't need to hear that necessarily right away, and they just need to be loved through it, like through Jesus, right? And so that's kind of what you just needed, some love,
Yeah, because that could have maybe changed everything. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it I don't know.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think isolation worked.
No.
I don't think. That's on me too. Like I definitely isolate when I'm going through things.
Yeah.
So
I think we all do, right? So speaking of divorce and life post-divorce, how have you navigated co-parenting while having your Christian values? And when I say Christian values, I mean like things like being patient and graceful and kind. Because
super hard.
Yeah.
It was super hard at the beginning.
Okay.
Very.
And maybe just name some of the biggest challenges and how you've kind of like overcome that together.
I'm trying to think of the biggest challenges. I think at the very beginning, our schedule was different. So it was, I would get the kids during the week and then he would have them every weekend. And I was like, absolutely not. So you're going to be the fun dad. And then I'm the mom that has to take the kids to school and do homework and be like mean mom, right? So that was a challenge. But then we like got into our groove. So it really wasn't, I think it was just like our communication. I think my ex was really hurt by me as well, just like I was hurt by him, but I was the one that filed, so I think it was really hurt, and he would tell me numerous times like, we're not gonna like this, you have a fake reality of like what co-parenting is gonna be, like we're not gonna be like friends that like co-parenting, like he was like it's like I don't want to put words in his mouth, but there was a point where I think he was like saying like on social media, he was like, yeah, there's like all these people that glamorize co-parenting. And he's like, and that's not going to be us. Like divorce has consequences. And
got it.
Like, this is like,
the consequences.
It's not, we're not going to be good, And I was like, okay, well, I take that as a challenge. We will be good. No, But I get it. He was coming from her.
Yeah.
So with me, I did have that dream where I was like, okay, we could still be cordial. Let's do birthdays together. Let's do Christmas together. Like, I had no problem.
Yeah, that's so funny.
And so I will say, so then it just takes time.
Yeah.
It just takes time because now we're in a really good space. We're not friends, but it's like we have a really good communication. So if he needs me to watch the kids or pick up the kids or vice versa, we really are flexible with that. And we will share things like, okay, the teacher, wrote me about this with Soli, or, hey, her play's coming up. But, we communicate well. I just say, like, don't think that the season you're in right now with your other co-parent is going to last forever. Yeah. It's not. It just, time does heal. And what you do in that time helps the healing.
Yes, and I will say that struggle of co-parenting will last forever if you as an individual don't make
intentional effort.
Yes.
Because that's true. That's a bad point.
Right, because that has to do with you doing work and him also doing work.
Yes.
Like, there were things that you both had to navigate. Like, you have to compromise in certain things. Like, you're not going to win every battle, right? And so specifically, how has it been co-parenting when it comes to like dating? Because you're still young, you're still beautiful. Just because you have 2 kids doesn't mean that you're not in the dating pool.
Have you seen that one Instagram where it's like who's gonna want you with 2 kids, and it's like, I'm gonna take some calls from the request line. I'm kidding, but
she's not.
No, I'm joking. But I think very difficult.
Because I think that's where most people.
That's very difficult. And I'm so guilty of getting attention or like a liking.
Wanting,
the attention. But not even wanting. Like, I do. It's.
You're like, it just happens. It just comes to me. And it's true. It's true. Guys, if you go in the airport with this girl, I'm
my gosh,
leave me alone.
No, I don't know what it is. Okay, but it's not even that I go looking for attention, but I do like attention. And I think many women like attention, especially when you're like, I'm out of my divorce. I'm like, do I still have it? Yeah. It's like, you like it. But I will say that I was the one, obviously, that jumped into relationships or dating or whatever first. Not a good look. Not a good look. Do not, if I was going to say anything.
That's good. Yeah.
I would say wait.
That's good. That's
to
good.
Date.
That's good
Wait
wisdom
to
right
date.
There. Yeah.
Because it just doesn't paint you in a good light, too. But that's one. 2, you need to have your own healing.
Yes.
But I'm just saying, like, it also just doesn't look good. So there's things that I've done that I was like, okay, not the best. But I was like, almost like, screw the world. Like, I don't care. Like, you say I'm not a Christian, say I'm backsliding, and like, I don't care. Like, that's kind of how I was like operating.
Like, pretty apathetic.
Yeah, just like, you're already talking about me. You already have gossiped. You've already said all these things. Like, sure, okay, I'm gonna go out, like, and just live my life. And it was almost like a screw you to everybody, I guess. So don't do what I did there. Unless you want to try, give it a go. But my advice is maybe don't. But I will say that when I started seriously dating somebody, what we had said, me and my ex, we said we will communicate and we'll like say, hey, I'm dating somebody and I want to introduce them to the kids. So he didn't feel like I did that, but the reason why he felt that way is because I was thinking, well, we're hanging out in like a group setting, a friend setting, or there's other people around, so I don't need to communicate that yet. It's not like this is my boyfriend and I'm bringing the kids. But then the kids, man, these kids, they don't keep no secrets. They jump out. Guess who we hung out with that? Like even with him, Mom, like they don't even get in the car. They're like, yeah, Dad hung out with so and so. I'm like, oh, cool. What does she look like? Is she funny? Like, I'm just.
Your interpretation of them is really accurate.
Like, oh my gosh, And so I know that those little munchkins ran back and they're like, we went to Oak Glen and we were with so and so, and I'm like, you can't, man, it's a friendship at that point, So that was hard to navigate at first. I just had to learn to ask, and you have to put your pride down in those moments because. For you might be thinking, why would I have to ask? Yeah. I'm my own person. I'm independent. I'm not married to him anymore. We got divorced. I can make my own decisions. But when kids are involved, it's so much better for you guys to both be on the same page.
And also what I'm hearing is you guys talked about rules and expectations before,
yeah,
but they weren't necessarily clear.
Oh, and they weren't necessarily always kept, but we did try.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, you know, and like even when you're in a relationship, you think people can just like read your mind and you make assumptions.
Yeah.
But when it comes to co-parenting, is you have to be so clear of like, hey, this, like lay it all out,
Yes.
you know, not have overgeneralized kind of statements.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it was hard though too for us because this is the first time we were dealing with this or like navigating it. So it's awkward. It's awkward. It's not fun. Like, hey, I'm thinking about bringing my new boyfriend.
Yeah.
We're going to go to Bubble World, just letting you know.
Yeah.
Like it's very tender. You know what I mean? And so that was probably difficult. I know for his family, my ex's family, it was difficult, I think, to see me in a relationship like on Instagram. Was probably really different. And I think I probably acted different too in that relationship than I did with my ex. So I just think it's a tender situation.
Yeah.
I don't really think there is a rule book. I do think that boundaries are very, very, very helpful. And I do think like as what you said, guidelines and try to be as clear as you can are helpful. At the end of the day, your feelings are still going to hurt. Yeah. It's still going to feel weird. My ex had not recently, but like it feels recent, had told me that he was like dating somebody. And I was happy for him. I was like, cool, okay. Like he's dating somebody. That's great. He said he wanted to introduce them to the kids. But then it's like, then when I knew that they were like all hanging out, like, and I'm just like home alone, you know, and I'm like, like, I wonder how that is. Or my daughter would come and be like, yeah, we did scrapbooking. I'm like, I can do scrapbooking with you.
Yeah, like the insecurity and jealousy, like
I could feel it in me, and it was a really, I don't know if I felt insecure. That's not what I felt. I felt it was honestly a weird feeling. I think it was like a protectiveness or a possessiveness over my kids.
I think also like even though like looking back, like the divorce was good for you guys, it was a good decision. But I think in moments like that, I think when it comes to your kids, like you start to think things like, oh, maybe that could have still been us. Like as a family, like, I could have still provided that for my kids. Like the idea of us all scrapbooking together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that I think when you get divorced, there's what ifs. Yeah. For sure. I think that's a very, very normal. Also, when you're dating, it can be very easy to compare that person with your ex. And so there's qualities of my ex-husband that maybe my new dating relationship didn't have, or vice versa. And it's like you're like, like interesting, and it's not like someone's better than the other. We're all different people. But it is very interesting to navigate. Very, very interesting to navigate.
And speaking of that little moment we touched on, your kids, children have a way of, responding to divorced and the idea of like their family separating. How did your kids respond to that? And what have you learned about them in the process and just you as a mother?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It is so hard. I get people in my DMs pretty regularly.
Yeah.
I can't even talk. About what did I do? Like, how did I tell the kids, or how did my kids react and respond? At the time, Sullivan was 4. He turned 5, and then Sophia was 8, turning 9. And it comes in waves. It's not just like one time they ask about it. It's almost like there's times where you feel like, oh, they're doing really well, and then boom, one night they're like, why aren't you and dad together? Like, it's like you're like tucking them in. You're like, it's like, remember that house we lived in? I miss that house. Why don't we live there? Like, I'm like, that house was too big anyways. But, it's like, I really just give them space to ask questions. I'm joking. Like, I joke about the house, but I really try to give them space. I hear them. I validate their feelings. I acknowledge it's hard. I acknowledge it's not what they want, because I never blew them off. I never wanted them to feel like they couldn't talk to me about it. If anything, I feel like my kids feel safe to talk to me about it, and I really, really value that about them. Yeah. They don't bring it up anymore. Like sometimes they'll bring up memories. Yeah. But they're not asking when we're going to get back together anymore. I'm on year 3 right now. So at the beginning, though, definitely they'd be like, well, are you guys going to get back together? Or why can't you guys just get back together? Or so you don't love each other anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, no, like we'll always love each other. We're a family. It just looks different, you know? And sometimes the answer is just don't do it for them. Sometimes they want to know everything. And obviously you have to use discernment. It's age appropriate stuff. You can't just spell out all your, tea.
Yes. There's a difference between transparency and vulnerability. So you need to be transparent, honest with your kids. I mean,
vulnerable.
You need to be vulnerable with your kids, but they don't need to know everything. Like you
and
do.
Maybe as they get older, things will come out, or maybe if when they're in their marriage, things will come out. I'm very open, and I have no problem admitting my faults in the marriage. I just think that there's obviously time and place, and when they have the capability of understanding that, and so that has been really hard to navigate. I do think it gets better, and I think as long as you create open communication with your kids and give them that space to be mad, to be sad, then they're going to be more willing to approach you with those issues and other issues in the future.
Yeah, and I'm a child of divorce, so I can speak to a lot of things just as a child walking through that. But I think the greatest thing you could do is be aligned with your truth with your ex-partner, because I think that was something when your kids come to ask you questions, I love that you created that space for them, because you're not rejecting their vulnerability and their courage to ask, right? But also it's I remember growing up and just hearing different things, and it was so hard for me because it kind of played this tug of war in my mind of what's truth,
Yeah.
And so just being aligned too with your husband, ex-husband, of what to say, what not to say,
Yeah, and I think we have done a pretty good job overall of doing that, and I think our faith is a big reason for that.
Yes,
I've never talked bad about my ex in front of the kids at all. Honestly, even if one of them complains about him, it's a small way, nothing crazy, but just recently, literally 2 days ago, my daughter was saying how it was annoying, something that her dad was doing or didn't do for her, and I just said, Sophia, we have to be careful with the words that we say, because you're being disrespectful in the way that you're talking about your dad. I it's not that I'm in a way, I guess I am defending him, but I still we're a team in the parenting journey.
I was gonna say we're still on the same team.
We're on the same team when it comes to our kids, and so I'm no, hey, listen, if you have an issue with dad, you need to take that up with dad, and you need to be vulnerable in your feelings, state your feelings, whatever the situation is, and let dad respond. Yeah. I don't need you to be telling me that dad's annoying or or whatever it is. I was because that's not kind language. Yeah, so. It's still being on the same team. I could easily be yeah, girl, I get it. But no, and I'm not her friend.
Yeah.
I'm her parent. I have to lead by example. So that's also hard.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, and you're doing a great job. I admire all of the aspects and seasons of life you've lived and how you've been able to navigate it. But what you said, that all comes down to your foundation in Jesus, and he's your strength and he's your guide. So
absolutely.
But we've talked about so much, but there is one more question I want to get to before we end. And you ask all your guests this, so I wanted to ask you this. But what would you say to people in how to turn their pain into purpose? But also with that question is, I think sometimes we think that we can only have purpose from pain and that we have to walk through a lot of suffering in order to find purpose. So I kind of wanted to do a two-part of, yes, people that are walking in pain, how would you encourage them to find their purpose? But also, how would you encourage people that are maybe listening to this that are I don't have the story that Alexis has, so I can never have a platform. I can never speak to someone, and how to find purpose in that too.
Absolutely. So for the first question, how do you turn your pain into purpose? I would first say you have to be real about the pain. I think that a lot of times we like to make it seem like it's not a big deal, or that, it's okay.
Yeah.
We brush it off and we don't sit in it to say, this was a big deal. This has impacted me. This has created a ripple effect in the way that maybe I approach relationships, the way that I approach life. It has affected the lens that I view the world, and accept it first. number one. And then number two, I always like use that term, like find the gold, find the gold in the pain. So what did your pain reveal to you about who you are? What did the pain reveal as far as a life lesson? Mm-hmm. What did it reveal then as to what you could then, like, how did the pain or how did the gold that you found, how did that impact other people? You know, and so then using that and sharing it.
Yeah.
I actually, like, after this, I'm recording a solo podcast about how to share your story. And part of that is you don't have to share your story on a podcast and in this big way. It can be with trusted people, trusted friends. And so then use your pain to then share.
Yeah.
And I think that you'll be really surprised about how many people are definitely impacted by your story. Yeah. So that would be the first part of the question.
Yeah. I like that because I think sometimes, like, we don't want to have like a victim mentality or be a victim to the things that we walk through. But sometimes we dismiss it and just try and be strong on our own and like suppress. But what you're saying is like, no, like you can acknowledge it and then notice, hey, I can overcome this because I have overcome it. Yep. And this is what I can do to help others.
Exactly.
It's good.
Exactly. And I love your point of the second question about what if someone feels like they haven't gone through all this? How are they going to walk in their purpose? Again, in this other episode that we are going to be releasing here soon, I talk about how every person has a story. And I use an example of, let's just say you were raised in the church and you were a pastor's kid. I've heard so many times from people in the church, well, my testimony isn't like as crazy as yours. Yeah. It's not as big as yours. And they almost diminish their own story because it's not as crazy. It's not as big. It doesn't seem as wow, right? And to me, I say, okay, you know what you could give and share to other people is the pressures you felt as a pastor's child. I don't know that story.
Yeah.
How you were able to stand firm in your faith against temptation to be like the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Number three, how you made your faith your own, personal, because you were raised in the church and maybe you had different questions and you had to come to terms with your own questions and your own faith and make it, you know, instead of just like, oh, I was raised Christian. You know, that's a story in and of itself. And that might be your purpose, is encouraging other Christians that find, oh, I don't have a big testimony.
I remember being at a conference one time, and this pastor who grew up in the church, he was a pastor's kid, he became a pastor, and he was talking about how he went to a prison and was doing ministry there, and he heard this guy tell his testimony, and it was like the craziest testimony of how God literally turned every single thing in his life that was like death and evil and just chaos into good. And he went up to him after and he's like, man, I wish I had your testimony. And the guy just stood there and looked at him and said, oh, I wish I had your testimony. Like, I wish I didn't have to do all of these things in order to know God. And it's one of my favorite stories that I like to reference because, to your point, like, so many people dismiss things just because they don't have all of these like big traumas attached to it. But I always say, like, look for God's character in someone's testimony. And when it comes to people that are raised in the church and that have been faithful in their walk with God, it just shows God's consistency of like how he's still the same for that person and he's still the same for you.
Exactly.
So,
absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
It's a great
It's
point.
good. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us and for listening to part 2 of my story. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And as always, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. As always, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And I'll see you next week.